Hey there, it's author and attorney Kelly O'Connell with KO Radio, delivering insights one podcast at a time. I am a licensed New Mexico attorney, and I go to work every day. And I'm also a writer, and did a talk show locally for 6 years, and a lot of other stuff, but including working in Alaska. Anyway, today we're taking another look at Jeff Epstein and Bill Gates. One of the most unlikely duos in history, wouldn't you say? Is Bill nuts? Well, we know Jeff is dead, but he must have been charming when he was alive. But it's deeper than that, my friends. And let's get into it. And we got a lot of stuff going on in the society, in the news, in politics right now. They're blaming the finding of the virus on Wuhan labs in China, which you can't blame them. And they are also fighting about the border still. There's a lot of craziness out there, and Biden is really falling in the polls, and he just doesn't seem like he's in control. And even some of my friends, I think, are getting ready to bail on him, so we'll have to do a show on that in the next few days. The title of today's show is Spirit of Total Domination Celebrated by Gates and Epstein. Libido Dominandi, as Augustine called it. The spirit of domination, the lust for domination. Ruthless Gates and Psycho Epstein scoffed at female view and were ruined by it. Okay, so trying to figure out how these two guys got together. They met somewhere, but there was some sort of a connection between the two. They were like two cockroaches, you know, meeting and rubbing their feelers against one another. How did it happen? I mean, it's got to be totally bizarre now. And I've already done a audio on this, but you know, I'm still fascinated. What exactly did they talk about? And this is after Bill Gates finds out that Jeff Epstein is not just a felon, not just a convicted man, not just a former prisoner, but he was also a sex offender, and not just any sex offender, but he went after girls, young girls. So Bill Gates is the, richest guy, most powerful guy financially in the world, or he was at this time probably. And he's got to, at some point, say to himself, I enjoy this gentleman, this guy's house, his friends, more than I enjoy my reputation. Or he thought it would never get out because he had already bought his way to a good reputation by giving away billions for vaccines, feeding the hungry in Africa. And now he's trying to make more money by selling vaccines. I don't even know what the idea behind his next venture is, but when they ask him if there should be a free giveaway of the vaccine, he immediately said no so fast it almost gave me whiplash. So he's still into making money, even if he's giving it away. So what did these guys talk about? I mean, what makes a cute girl? What it's like to kiss a 16-year-old when you're a 55 or 60-year-old guy. I mean, I think that it wasn't so much that they were talking about young girls as they were talking about women. Now, Bill Gates's wife has got a bunch of videos up on the internet, and see if I can find them here for you and just give you the titles. And her first name's Melinda. Not, to me, a highly attractive lady, but, here is some of these, some of the names of these. Let me just put in feminism. All right, so she comes up, and this lady didn't have any money before she met Bill. She's got videos on feminism, why feminism is this great new thing. And it's all kinds of stuff like that. Now, Bill, and I've like I said this before, but it bears repeating. Bill was out golfing, and he found out that, or he wanted to tell his friends that he was unhappy with his wife because they weren't intimate. And so because they weren't intimate, Bill had gone and talked to Jeffrey Epstein. And so during this talk, he found a guy that was very highly sourced, very highly connected. Epstein has all of these friends, including Bill Clinton, people that were more powerful and well-known than Bill Gates was. And he has naked pictures around his house. He's got all kinds of females, young women traipsing around his house, downtown New York City. And so there was a connection that was made there. And I believe from the little bit that I've studied that, in my knowledge of human nature, that Bill Gates was frustrated with his wife. He's worth $150 billion and his wife won't sleep with him. And he's got to be saying to himself, what does it take to get a connection around here? And so he had been cheating on his wife with a Microsoft employee. He hit on the women at Microsoft. He also had this relationship with his ex-girlfriend. He'd meet her once a year, and they'd spend a dirty weekend at her place on the beach. And, nobody knew about all this stuff. And so what happened then is that he meets Epstein. He starts interacting with him. His wife is freaked out by this. She's upset. And Gates said he only met him for 6 times. Well, 6 times is a lot. But it was dozens and dozens of times. The question is, of course, was he at Lolita Island? Was he in New Mexico? Did they just hang out in New York? And why did Bill keep hanging around him when he knew his wife was upset? And I think the reason is that he didn't buy into the feminism. And he found it obnoxious. And the reason, my proof for that is how he hit on women, how he had affairs, how he hung out with Epstein. Epstein was the exact opposite, the world's worst, most anti-feminist guy in history. So I say here in this article, for the very same reason Bill Gates did well in business, he killed it in business. He rejected feminism but embraced Jeff Epstein's misogynistic world. Now, Epstein, if you remember the stories about this guy, he defrauded businessmen or he blackmailed them. He somehow got money from very wealthy guys. He blackmailed politicians and he raped girls. Now, Gates is famous in The Soul of the New Machine and in stories about a guy by the name of Gary Kildall of taking other people's stuff. So they're both kind of edgy guys, or they're both off the reservation. When they finally met, they recognized a dominating lust in each other and were fascinated by that, and they both had a hobby of fantasizing about girls and being in either an unhappy relationship or no relationship. So one served mammon. He was the world's richest man. It was Bill Gates. And the other one served demons as the globe's great pedophile rapist. Now, Nietzsche termed Libido Dominandi as will to power, a wild anarchic nihilism destined to ruin all. Anarchism and nihilism means lawlessness. And did the spirit between them, that they hooked up, that they were kind of two bodies, they were two planets circling one another. Maybe Bill Gates was like Jupiter, Venus, whatever, a big planet, and Jeff was a moon that was circling around them. But did this same spirit of domination ruin both these guys alive? And I think it does, because Jeff Epstein is dead. He killed himself. But Bill Gates has exposed himself as a guy that is either perverted or he doesn't care if he hangs around rapists. So they weren't so different after all. And on the surface, they were totally different, but deep down they thrilled at indefensible transactions of cantilevering power. You know, and a cantilever is something that you can pick up a heavy object with. And I think that they're, maneuvering, they're manipulating, they're dominating, they're forcing people to do what they don't want to do. In Epstein's case, or in Bill Gates' case, he's taking advantage of his position. Well, we already know about Epstein's downfall. All of the girls, all of the rapes, all of the rich and powerful friends, and his island where he couldn't get prosecuted for rape. Now, for Gates, and then he dies. He kills himself supposedly, although it seems like he was murdered. For Gates, he supposedly borrowed the operating software that made him a billionaire from Gary Kildall, who originally developed this program. And this, is not even debatable. There's no debate. It's in the history of Bill Gates and Microsoft that they got this information somehow. They copied it, maybe changed it somewhat. I don't know what the laws are on that, but it was licensed to Apple, and Bill Gates made billions and Gary Kildall made a few millions, and then he got very, very bitter at this loss of his creation. And he had gotten into, although he's a brilliant scientist or a software guy, he started hanging around bikers. He got drunk one day and got in a fight with a biker and got punched in the face and fell back and hit his head and died. And I think he was 52, so it was a real shame. But here's what Gates did. He bought a program, and this is copied from a story that I found, but I also put the autobiography of Kildall in here. Here's what Gates did. He bought a program from a small software company called the Quick and Dirty Operating System, or QDOS, for the price of $75,000. QDOS was in fact a ripoff of Gary's CPM program. Then he changed the name of it to MS-DOS, Microsoft DOS, and licensed it to IBM. A year later, IBM's personal computers entered the market, and MS-DOS was sold alongside each one of them. And, Kildall was in there. He was trying to fight, but they say he was up flying his plane when they came to his door and knocked, and the people from Microsoft tried to force his wife to sell it for a one-time price of $50,000 or whatever, and she wouldn't do it. And so it just became a nightmare for Kildall, and then he died young. All right, so now I'm going to talk about St. Augustine's City of God. Augustine is the first really important philosopher who's a Christian. And this is like 3rd century in the Middle East. He writes a book called The City of God, and the Bible talks about the City of God, right? And famously in the book of Revelations, it's in there, and in some other places in the Bible. Now, he speaks of Libido Dominandi, opening the city of God against the pagans, contrasting the city of God's virtue of humility with the city of man inflamed by a Libido Dominandi, lust for mastery. So he's opposing the city of God, the place where God comes first, where people are humbled, where they serve one another, they serve God, versus the city of man, where everything is about the self, the lust for mastery, mastering other people, so you can use them to meet your own needs or your own goals. Now, Augustine says in this chapter, in this beginning chapter, that your lust for mastery will ultimately master you. It caused Adam and Eve to rebel to be like God in Genesis 3:46. It exchanges dependence on God for self-sufficiency. And you know that people who are self-sufficient, totally self-sufficient, oftentimes get in trouble. Ultimately, lust for mastery exchanges God for self. Augustine writes about this. He says thus, a good man though a slave is free, but a wicked man though a king is a slave. For he serves not one man alone, but what is worse, as many masters as he has vices. Book 4, third verse, or third section. It's either God as master or your overpowering vices as your master. Now, a guy by the name of Michael E. Jones wrote a book. He's a Catholic guy. He wrote a book called Libido Dominandi, the same term. And it was about sexual liberation and political control. And he wrote this maybe, I think, back in the 80s. And his argument is that if you want to control a group of people, you bring in sexual liberality, you bring in sexual freedom. And by doing that, people become perverted and begin worshiping themselves through sex, just serving themselves. Now, Augustine said that man's freedom arose from his moral condition. The pervert Marquis de Sade that I had mentioned last time, which was, I said, the kind of symbolic role model for Bill Gates, because he chose Epstein, who was also, like de Sade, he was a rapist and an intellectual. The pervert Marquis de Sade stated, quote, "The freest of all people are those who are the most friendly to murder." So the less rules you have, in other words, the more free you are. Now, de Sade, of course, demanded a sex revolution to accompany the bloody political revolution sweeping France, the French Revolution. Why? Because things were totally out of control, and that's how he liked it, because then you can satisfy every lust, every desire, every fantasy that you have. Now, Jones describes how sexual liberation is a move for societal control. Those seeking tyranny loosen sexual mores or laws as liberated libidos as the sex drive uncoils towards anarchy. Broken families, and what's the result of this? Well, it's broken families, poverty, fatherlessness, atheism, and lawlessness are the harvest of this sexual nihilism. Nihilism is the condition of no rules whatsoever. And if you think back to it, the sexual revolution, it brought in the pill, and it broke down rules. It said you don't have to be married to have sex anymore. And in those days, it was kind of dating to find someone to live with for a lot of people. But then it became, as it is today, you can do anything that you want with anybody, whether they're married or single, whether they're the same sex or the opposite sex, or trans, they've had an operation or whatever. And this society is caught up in its lusts, and it's not looking ahead, and there's a train wreck coming. You've got to see it. I mean, it's just right around the corner. And I got to tell you, everything that Trump predicted would come true on the left has come true, and nobody's talking about it. And everything that he changed, that was changed back by Biden, is a total disaster. So we're distracted. We're caught up in all of these novel theories, being woke and stuff, and we're not looking down the tracks, and there's another train headed for us. All right, so the last intellectual I'll mention here is Eric Voegelin on Libido Dominandi. Eric Voegelin was a German scholar. He was around at the time that Hitler was coming up, and so he relocated to America, and he wrote a lot about the Gnostics. And the Gnostics were the people in the ancient world around the time of the apostles, a little bit later, maybe 100 years or so later. And the Gnostics had a type of Christianity, they had a type of gospel, but the salvation in the gospel was from enlightenment, not faith, not saved by the grace of God, not faith connecting you back to God. The gospel's the offer, the response is faith. Not that. It is an act of self-will. It's an act of self-discipline that you go out and study the world, and as you gain information, when you get enough information, you get saved. So that's Gnosticism, saved by the intellect. And it is, you're not saved by anybody, because Gnosticism ultimately doesn't have a God in it, especially modern Gnosticism. It's intellectual. It's elite. It separates you. All these guys coming out of the Ivy League, all these women are elites, and they're buying into this. They're buying into Gnosticism to be saved by your brilliance, by your brain, by your knowledge, by your intellectual activity. It's an act of works. it's also self-referential. I save myself by learning. All right. So Eric Voegelin on Libido Dominandi, and he defined it as pleasure in dominating, especially intellectual domination. Voegelin called the sickness of modernity pneumopathology. Pneumos is spirit, and pathology is sickness. Those in revolt against God and creation arbitrarily omit or remove elements of reality to produce the fantasy of a new world. So these are these elites. These are these crazy people who open the border and pretend that nothing bad could happen. They shut down oil pipelines and say, we'll be fine. Gas doubles or triples in price, don't worry about it. We got to pay for the environment. You know those people. You give money to Iran, and Iran buys a bunch of missiles with it and sends them over to Hamas, and Hamas blows the hell out of Israel, although they got back a lot worse than they gave. Now, those in revolt against God and creation arbitrarily omit elements of reality to produce the fantasy of a new world. Okay? So now you're not saved, and you think that you're in contact with the universe, and you're not. That's the shape these people are in. This is the Gnostics that we're living with now. This is, in other words, elites. These people that go around and tell us what to do and judge us all the time. So both Gates and Epstein lived in unreality, since controlling others, but couldn't accept following the same laws as the souls they tried to dominate. Right? You want to, we're all of a limited power, a limited intellect, limited strength. And we have to resist trying to dominate other people to meet our needs, right? Because we're incomplete. Our needs are not met. God's needs are already met. Now, you're trying to put your will on somebody else, but you're not accepting that you're under the same laws of the universe. You're under the same moral and ethical laws, God's law, as these other people. You're trying to dominate them and destroy them ultimately. Now, Bill Gates may not be in this same category as Epstein. You might say it's a little bit unfair to compare the two. But on the other hand, I would say they're both into radical domination. You know, to become the world's richest guy on your own doesn't happen by accident. And he wanted to dominate people. And I'm sure if it wasn't the days of being woke and feminism and everything, he'd be a lot more out of control. But he's not happy. He's living with a woman that doesn't love him, doesn't feel attracted to him, even though he's wildly successful and super duper, super rich. He always seems to be walking around in a sweater, doesn't he? Now, Voegelin said the real impulse behind such crazy leftism was to commandeer the world long enough to destroy God, thereby wiping away all sin and any hell of judgment. So the real goal is selfish of these leftists, of these Gnostics, of these woke people that we deal with all the time. They are trying to destroy God. That's why they're not godly. To be godly, you have to follow God. These people don't admit there is a God. So in doing that, they hope to make the entire world and universe forget about God, and that gets rid of sin. And we're all under the law of sin, right? And if there's no sin, there's no judgment. So currently, while Gates sells snake oil COVID schemes, similar leftists plan to institute the Great Reset, where all debts are canceled and property abolished by the year 2030. And this is the Davos group. And they're absolutely crazy. They're going to get rid of property. They're going to get rid of debt. And it's just the absolute dream of Marxism. And my last thoughts here: utopian madmen will be the ruin of us all. All right, well, hey, thanks for tuning in and looking at the time. 25 minutes could be worse. I appreciate hanging out with you. I hope you have a wonderful day, and stop in tomorrow and I'll have another podcast for you. Kelly O'Connell, and I hope you stay safe and you just have a wonderful time.